So, as I mentioned at the beginning of worship, we are starting this series, Bible Stories for Grown-Ups, with probably one of the most familiar stories of the Hebrew Bible, if not the Bible as a whole, and that is Noah and the Great Flood, or as most of us probably know it as, Noah's Ark, right? Excuse me. The animals go marching two by two, and Noah has a long white beard, and there are giraffes that are sticking their heads out of the window on the ark, smiling. And somewhere in the background, there is always this beautiful rainbow. You know, the imagery is everywhere in children's books and children's Bibles, and I would guess, could be wrong, but I would guess that probably almost every nursery or children's ministry area across the country has some piece of Noah's Ark art. Oh, and so do we. Alvaro and I took this down from our nursery this morning, and look, you can say, "Hi, animals." Hello. Oh, it makes fun too, you know, a fun little toy for babies. And we also have Bibles as well. Bibles that we pass out, Growing in God's Love, a story Bible. Right on the front cover here is Noah's Ark. And our Spark Bible that we have in our classrooms. White beard, smiling Noah. The dove, all the creeping things on the front and the back, right here. You know, this is one of those stories that I remember from childhood, not because of my kids' Bible. I had a Precious Moments Bible. I didn't have a fun, colorful Bible. But because of the song that we used to sing every morning at church camp to wake us up. You might know it. Rise and shine and give God the glory, glory. Rise and shine and give God the glory, glory. Rise and shine and give God the glory, glory, children of the Lord. God said to Noah, there's gonna be a floody, floody. God said to Noah, there's gonna be... Okay. Get those animals out of the muddy, muddy. I won't make us sing all 8 verses. And I also want to apologize to any former campers of mine who are listening, because I realize now how obnoxious that might have been as you were just trying to get a few extra Z's on your bunk in the summer. But whether you remember this story from a children's Bible or a church camp song, or maybe one of those old flannelgrams, a piece of cloth where you would stick up the different characters to learn the Bible stories. Did anybody have that growing up? Oh, a few hands. Yeah, you know what I'm talking about. If not, Google it. They're great. We might have one here. I'll have to ask. I bet Kibby knows. However you heard this story, what you gathered today, I'm sure, from what Troy read, is that this is anything but a story for children. And maybe that's why Noah is a good place for us to begin this series. Because when we come back to these familiar stories as adults, we can ask different questions. Not simply, but why did this happen exactly this way? But maybe, why did our spiritual ancestors pass this story on from generation to generation? What were they trying to understand about themselves, about the world, about God? And perhaps most importantly, what might this ancient story still have to say to us today? And to begin answering those questions, we need to have a little context. You know, catastrophic flooding wasn't a concern unique to ancient Israel. Many cultures had and have their own flood stories. And one of the oldest ones, comes from the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian text some scholars consider the oldest surviving piece of written literature in the world. And in that story, the gods grow angry at humanity for being too noisy. Yeah, Alvaro and I would be in big trouble. And they agree to destroy all of human life with a flood, and they plan to keep it a secret. But the God of wisdom does not like this plan and finds a loophole and says this secret plan of theirs out loud to a wall of reeds in which a man had his home built. Pishtim. So technically, he was keeping his oath while still warning humanity. And so this man tears down all of the reeds around his home and his home of reeds and builds a boat from them and loads it with his family and the seed of every living creature. And when the storm is over, he releases a dove and then a swallow, and both return, not having found anywhere to land. And finally, he releases a raven, which doesn't come back, and so he knows that it is safe for him and his family and all of the creatures to leave the boat. And when he's off the boat, he offers a sacrifice, and the gods are so moved that they offer him and his wife immortality. And the story ends with a rainbow in the sky and the promise never to flood the earth again. Now, if you dozed off for a second there, no, that was not the story of Noah from the Bible, but the flood story from the Epic of Gilgamesh. Pretty similar, huh? It's a reminder that our scriptures and our sermons and our books and our social media posts and movie scripts and TV shows weren't written in a vacuum. The Bible took shape in a world full of other voices, all telling stories, all trying to make sense of the world, of this chaos that they found themselves in. You know, different lenses help us to see different things. Today, we have different lenses on than the first time we might have heard or read this story as a child. And when we understand that, the question becomes less, did Noah really get every species of that animal onto that boat? And more, what is this story trying to tell us? Where is God still speaking today? To understand what that might be, we have to actually go backward. Back to the beginning of Genesis. The opening chapter pictures creation emerging from a watery chaos. And God begins to bring order to that chaos. And part of what God does is he separates the water within the chaos. The waters above from the waters below. The ancient understanding was that there was this dome that was formed, and that dome was called sky. And God said that it was very good. This dome was a dome of protection, holding back those waters of chaos above. Again, this isn't a science textbooked. This is an ancient people trying to make sense of the world they found themselves in. But it matters for this story, for Noah's story today, because the flood is the undoing of that protective dome. And according to our narrator, what causes this collapse isn't some cosmic or chaos. It's us. It's human violence. You might be thinking, now wait a minute. We are only 6 chapters into the Bible, and things have gotten so bad, so violent, so quickly that God's like, pop that dome, let the waters kill everything. So we have to back up again. And this time, we come to the story of Cain and Abel, 2 brothers. Many of us probably assume that the first time the word sin appears in the Bible is with the story of Adam and Eve eating that forbidden fruit. It isn't. The word first appears in the story of Cain and Abel. Cain is angry and resentful of his brother, and God warns him, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it. The first appearance of sin in the Bible is in the story connected with sibling violence. And it's singular. It's not plural. It's not a list of things that Cain was doing wrong. It was a force that Cain didn't master. And, spoiler alert, he kills his brother. And from there, the violence multiplies. And by the time we reach Noah, the earth is filled with violence, human violence, passed down from generation to generation, and it just keeps growing. And that's the flood's real cause. Not divine annoyance about humans that were too noisy, but a world that has genuinely lost itself to this violence over and over and over again until even God grieves having made it. And the violent floodwaters are released. After Noah's family steps off the ark, they build an altar. And God makes a promise and says, never again shall all flesh be cut off by the waters of a flood. I have set my bow in the clouds, and it shall be a sign of this covenant. And we know that as a rainbow. But the Hebrew word used there is keshet, which is also the word for a warrior's bow, a weapon. So God is hanging God's weapon in the clouds and says, never again. Violence will not cure violence. Perhaps that covenant invites us to ask what violence we too are being called to lay down. You know, the irony isn't lost on me that this same rainbow has become a symbol of the LGBTQ community. And in recent years, I've heard Christians talk about the need to reclaim the rainbow. But here's the thing. Christians don't own the rainbow. According to this story, the rainbow is God's sign of covenant with the whole earth, with Noah and his descendants, and also with the birds and the animals and all the creeping things, all living creature for all generations. Christians can't claim the rainbow because it wasn't ours to begin with. It is God's. But we do need to remember what it means. Because I have to believe that the God who hangs that bow in the clouds and says, never again, does not want that rainbow to be turned into a weapon against our fellow human beings. And yet, it has. Our LGBTQ siblings have experienced extraordinary violence, physical violence, emotional violence, violence inflicted with words and laws and rejection and exclusion and religion. We know names like Matthew Shepard and Harvey Milk, and we know that there are countless others whose names we will never know. And the tragedy is compounded when that violence is committed in the name of God. The God who said, never again. Because the rainbow isn't a weapon, it is a promise of relationship. A declaration that destruction will not have the final word. So maybe the question isn't who gets to claim the rainbow. Maybe the question is whether we are willing to live by what it represents. Can we resist violence without allowing violence to remake us in its image? Can we choose another way? And this isn't just violence on a macro level. We live in an age where we can hide behind a screen or a phone and say almost anything, where videos can be faked so convincingly that we have to research whether or not what we're seeing is real. Our ancestors could never have imagined the kind of harm that we are now capable of with words, with weapons, with our actions. We know how quickly resentment becomes retaliation. Someone hurts us, we hurt them. Someone dehumanizes us, we dehumanize them. And before long, everyone is adding water to the flood. Josh Scott, the author of this book that our series is based on, reminds us that our words have power. They can de-escalate a situation, or they can become like gasoline poured onto a fire. So Scott invites us to imagine some arcs that might help us get through the flood and toward a different future. And the first one of those arcs is empathy, the willingness to truly see another person's humanity, not necessarily agree with them, not to excuse harmful behavior or not build boundaries when those are needed, but to recognize that we are on a shared human journey. The divine in me honors and sees the divine in you. And when we lose sight of one another's humanity and that divine spark, fear and violence have very fertile ground to grow. And then there's compassion. This next arc he invites us to step on. If empathy allows us to understand another's experience, compassion asks us what we will do in response. Compassion is empathy put into action. And finally, Scott invites us to board the ark of justice and peace. One ark, because those two cannot be separated. We sometimes imagine peace as the absence of conflict. Everybody getting along, no one making too much noise. But the biblical version of peace is much richer than that. Peace is wholeness. It's shalom. It's the restoration of relationships, the healing of what has been broken. Following the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, thousands took to the streets across the country. And if you walked with them, you might have joined in the chorus of no justice, no peace. No justice, no peace. This isn't a threat. It's truth being proclaimed that you can't have one without the other. There is never true peace without justice. So maybe the point of Noah's story isn't preparing for the next flood, getting whatever we're going to build our ark with in order. Maybe it's preventing one. Every time that bow appears in the sky, we are invited to remember that covenant too. To look at a world still filled with violence and choose another way. To do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with our God. To choose compassion and make peace and seek wholeness one act at a time until each of those acts, those small acts, add up and the world looks a little less like the flood and a little more like the creation that God called good. May it be so. Amen.